Thank you very much for that, Chris. It is interesting, and there's a few points that we might want to bring out in our panel sessions. We get that underway. Now, perhaps you might want to stay with us as well, Chris.
Yes, of course.
A few points where you can come in and join us on that. Let me introduce to you our other speakers that we have here today. Olivier Herson is Intelsat's Managing Sales Director in Europe, and also joined by Mitya Lovsin, who is the General Manager of STN. First of all, Olivier, tell us just ever so briefly about your role at Intelsat right now.
Good morning, everybody. Julian, thanks a lot for asking. So in few words, as you said, the title is Managing Sales Director, which means basically being in charge of the media operation for the EMEA region, with a big focus on the Western and Eastern Europe. So I would like to say almost everything, excluding the Middle East. We do have, obviously, the headquarters is in Washington, in Tysons, but we do have the EMEA headquarters based in London, in Chiswick Park. And I'm managing a team of sales director. And we are from the London office covering, I would like to say, obviously Europe-based customers, but not only, because today, obviously, the business being global, we are helping our customers to be everywhere. And I think Mitya from STN is a very good example for this. Hopefully,
I guess, Olivier, even despite the best efforts of Brexit, London and the UK remains a hub for international broadcasting, not just for Europe, but connections into the Middle East as well.
Yes, definitely. So, as I said, London is the HQ for all the EMEA region, but it's not the only office we do benefit from. And the team, I would like to say, are everywhere. We have hundreds of people to cover the region, on a total of 2,000 employees within the organization, and our customers are everywhere. So yes, London is extremely important because obviously we have a lot of broadcasters and big players, pure players based in England, but we have a lot of customers based in Paris. We have a lot of customers based in Central and Eastern Europe. And we obviously, through a partnership with Telenor, we are addressing customers indirectly based in the Nordics. So I think at the end of the day, business here, obviously, we have customers everywhere. And I don't think Brexit is going to change anything, honestly, because our organization is adapted and is extremely reactive, and we are agile. So it's not. It could only bring new opportunities, let's say.
And thank you. Yes, go on. Thank you, Olivier. Mitya, thank you very much for joining us today. Tell us, for those who don't know, just a little bit about STN and also your role within the organisation.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Well, STN is one of the providers which grew, and we are still pretty much 95% of the broadcasting distribution type of teleport here, based in Slovenia, in the heart of Europe, and from that give us a very good viewing angle for all the prime satellites in Europe, the whole of the Middle East and Africa. As I said, we operate worldwide, which means that we also distribute the channels over to Asia and Americas. For that, we use our valuable partners such as Intelsat, which help us out there with the capacity and the ground infrastructure. So in general, we started as a more local European type of provider back in 2004, and then expanded into the Middle East and Africa, and then beyond, obviously, to Americas and Australia later on. And now we are one of the providers which can basically bring the channel wherever the audience is around the world.
Right. Well, let's pick up now maybe on some of the points that Chris raised during his presentation. And it's interesting because, not that long ago, people might have said, that's it for satellite, there's not going to be any more launches. But kind of, as we saw from Chris's presentation, satellite is very much alive and well, and there's actually some very dominant players across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond who are using satellite as their key platform in order to distribute content direct to the consumer and also onto the various cable networks and IPTV networks. They're mixing it up then with all the Netflix, Amazon, and some of the local services. So, Olivier, what is it about satellite that means it's still got it?
Yes. So for us, media, so obviously media through satellite is representing a revenue in the region of $800 million, which is extremely important. And we saw the very interesting survey and the trends that Chris has shared with us earlier. So I think its technology is extremely resilient. Obviously, it is the case for us and our customers, but I think globally for the market. So obviously it's a robust and resilient technology. The revenue is stable, and as Chris just explained, I think satellite, and especially satellite DTH, is diversifying, which is extremely important. There is a shift in the applications, what the customers, so our direct customers, and the final consumer is looking for. And obviously, 4K is a very good example, and Chris has just shared, and we see clearly there is a trend, and some pure players based in Central Eastern Europe have a huge offer, huge portfolio of content, which is great. And obviously, we are one of the pioneers for this kind of contents to be to make them available. So this is one. The other thing I would like to, the other point I would like to stress is that there is a complexity in an hybrid environment where today the ecosystem is a mix of different kind of technologies, and different pay TV pure players are using different kind of technologies. So at the end of the day, probably for the final customer, the viewer, it's not extremely important how we get the contents or where they're coming from, but what he has effectively access to. And this is, I think it's a fair point once again to repeat that DTH is diversifying these days, as Chris rightly mentioned.
And it was interesting. One of the things that stuck out to me was in the way that the new Ultra HD channels are launching, but actually there's relatively few of those around at the moment. But what we are seeing is new HD channels still being added in many markets in much the same way. If you go back, I don't know, 10, maybe a dozen years, there was a scenario where HD was launching. There weren't that many channels, but actually at that time, standard definition channels were still growing. So in a roundabout way, we're kind of seeing a little repetition, if you like, of history, at least in part.
Yes, it is true. And I think we are in 2021, obviously. And I think still today, when you look at if you do a quick benchmark or survey, or what are the video on demand library available, whoever is the player, wherever they are based and whatever is the technology, you still have a fair percentage of SD programs or programs available only in SD. So that's number one. And obviously HD is growing, thanks God. And I would like to say it's something that we have been looking for a while now. So there is a shift from SD to HD, but there is still a fair, migration and upgrade to be done from SD to HD. And obviously the next step, or let's say the step running in parallel, is the 4K. So sometimes you notice that you have channels. The first natural step will be SD to HD. It makes perfect sense. But in other cases, you will have people who are going for 4K directly. And as Chris has shared with us, we have some on our satellites, on One West, not to mention, but on IS-11 as well, we have some good examples. And I think we do have a mission with our partners, the pay TV broadcaster, or even sometimes it could be a free-to-air player, but let's say, first, it comes probably from a pay TV environment, and typically on One West, where we have a complexity of conditional access system and different players, and even hybrid environment between cable, DTH, and then even DTT. 4K is made available to a large audience, talking something around 15 different languages. So I think that's this is extremely important, together with the fact that we are taking content globally with companies such as STN.
And on the subject of STN, of course, we've got Mitya with us today. Well, I guess that you haven't had too much of an opportunity recently to, walk around your play out and see what's going out from where. But presumably, were you able to do so, you'd be getting a pretty good idea of the kind of trends that Olivier has just been describing there.
Yeah, I think Olivier summed it up quite nicely, so I don't want to repeat it. But yeah, I mean, I do want to go back maybe to a comment on one of the Chris's slide, which talks about the Ultra HD, right? And what we see is the trend of the Ultra HD, as he mentioned, growing. But we have to be careful, because this is very important for the satellite operators, but for the service providers, teleport providers like us, not so much, because most of the UHD we see popping up is on the pay TV platforms, right? We operate DTH free-to-air, and for that, at the moment, there is no interest, However, as Olivier said, rightly so, the SD to HD conversion is a big thing, and everybody is doing it. So we see a major increase in this, But again, the HD been around for more than 20 years. So, after 20 years, it was about time that, that everybody steps up and starts. And I don't think that there is any household, even when we go to Africa or Middle East, that doesn't have, the OLED or, some kind of really fancy TV at home. So I think this is very important upgrade for the viewers at the end. And I think all the channels recognize this need to upgrade, even let's say religious channels that, originally they were happy just to get the message out. It's not the case anymore, They all want to upgrade to HD, because this is what they see there is a added value, So maybe this is the take on the, SD HD versus the Ultra HD from our side.
And I guess I think if you go flick through the satellite bands, there are indeed channels up and running who show back-to-back films in black and white. So there's still a bit of evolution to come along on the chain. But Mitya, as those HD channels are launching, are the costs coming down for everyone in the chain, or are they remaining relatively stable compared to what they've been over the past, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years?
I think that's the reason for the upgrade, because they don't really add much to the cost these days anymore. With the new technologies, for the encoding and the space required on the satellite. Because let's be honest, the most expensive part of our chain is the satellite, right? And of course, if you don't add the cost on that because of the new technology being available, which enables you to have a perfect good HD channel with a lower bitrate, of course they don't add to the cost. And I think this is the important, and this is what was the game changer in the last few years for them.
And then it's interesting. I wonder if in many ways HD has become a retention tool almost for the operators. And I mean that in the way that, if you don't have HD, then actually people might wander off now and look at somebody else's channel, because when you don't have to go back too long, and commercial channels in particular, the free-to-air channels, were saying, well, I don't want to go HD because I'm not going to be able to charge the advertiser any more for the advertising spots than I can an SD. So I might as well stay where I am. But that argument is something which has disappeared now, I think.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
At the same time, the other interesting thing, and I think Olivier sort of alluded to this, and yourself as well, is the free-to-air channels. There does seem, yes, there are some very big pay TV groups out there, as Chris illustrated in his presentation, but you're also getting free-to-air channels, sometimes in some markets, little clusters of free-to-air channels as well, which are developing. And I wonder if you have any examples of how those are building.
Olivier, you want to answer that?
Olivia, do you want to take that one? So my mind goes to, there's a fairly recent launch of Premium Free in South Africa, for example, which is, I think, the latest. The company behind that has launched in a couple of other African markets. Again, a cluster of free-to-air channels, which for certain sectors of the public, they're happy to put up a satellite dish, but they don't necessarily have the cash in order to pay for those premium sports and movie channels.
Michel, you want to answer first on G19, maybe?
No, please go ahead, because again, from our side, I don't really have much to add on this particular topic. So please go ahead.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Michel. I think, Julian, just one quick comment around G19, which is an asset where with Michel and STN, we are definitely focusing on. Just to quickly come back to the HD point, which is extremely important. We have something like 300 TV channels on G19 covering the US, and there are up to 30 languages, available, and obviously there are fair diaspora, Arabic, Farsi, and so on. And I think it's 1/3 of the Farsi and Arabic speakers living in the US are watching G19. But on those 300-ish TV channels, HD are representing maybe 15%, which is not bad, but there's still a huge space to grow. And I think this is something Michel could effectively comment on. To your point, Julian, what's happening elsewhere in Africa, not to mention IS-20 in this specific case, is extremely interesting because, okay, this is definitely a platform, same as G19, was born as a free-to-air platform. So typically you won't find any pay TV players over there, but there is something else, or there is probably other opportunities. And we have a very good example that we will discuss later on during today's presentation, today's session, where effectively there is like a premium free-to-air or free-to-view, platform or contents being made available. And this is extremely interesting to observe and to support in terms of initiatives. And then in these cases, yes, let's start directly in HD when we can, and probably later on, let's see what happens in UHD. But to Mitcha's point, UHD on a pure free-to-air environment is not straightforward. You need to have some incentives, right? And you need to have someone creating the demand, and you need someone making sure that the final customer will have the right tools, so technology, so latest gen of digital set-top boxes or TV sets to watch the content. Because as Micha said, most of the TV sets nowadays, life cycle of a TV is something like 7 years. So we can assume that there is a fair, latest gen of TV sets deployed everywhere. In the US on G19, in Africa on IS-20, One OS in Europe. But sometimes people are still watching TV using old DVB-S MPEG-2 set-top boxes. So those people don't necessarily feel the need to watch in HD, or they're not aware. And then the day they do the experience is something else. So I think that's another interesting point we can keep in mind. I will stop here, Julian, because I think you will have other questions.
Just add to that, Olivier. It's really funny because you're right. I mean, okay, the 4K, and the big TVs, the price, the consumer price did drop down significantly. However, they still cost between 1, 2, 3 grand, And then you come to the household, they have this beautiful TV and the set-top box, which is like 20 years old, and it costs 20 euros, right, to replace it. But they don't do it, they don't replace the set-top box. So what's worth then to have this big TV, beautiful TV if you don't replace the set-top box to be to the latest standard to be able to receive the HD and UHD? And this is a bit of a, kind of a catch-up thing that is happening on the market, even in America these days,
Yeah, this is quite bizarre, really, when that happens, and it so often does. Or people look at something on completely the wrong input to the TV, so they get a lesser picture than if they did it another way. But I'd like to explore this sort of concept of clusters of channels, perhaps, because when you get a set of free-to-air channels, quite often there may be another player who comes along from a neighbouring market, launches another set of channels, but of course some of the first set are also interesting to their target audience as well, and you get this sort of constant overlap, if you like, where you can build, and maybe this is something which G19 is looking at, of being able to really make itself a centre of free-to-air services. I don't know if, let me think, Mitya, do you have any sort of examples of where that's happened?
I mean, I don't have any examples where it happens, because the G19 is a very strong, it's like a stronghold that, you know, that the satellite for the free-to-air market for the people, non-American people who move to America, right? And I don't think that, I mean, many satellites, you know, SES tried it, I don't know how many times, you know, to get the piece of this cake, but they were never very successful, you know. And G19, in all those years that we are on, and this is basically from the beginning, for the last 15 years, it's remaining its strong position. So the channels, when they want to go for, say, outside the Americas, so mostly Middle East, you know, African channels, Asian channels, as Olivier mentioned, there's more than 30 different, you know, languages which are represented there. So all these big communities, which, you know, the huge populations of the move to the United States and Canada, you know, they want to watch their own program. And the G19 for sure is still, you know, when you ask the question, we want to be in the US for our diaspora there, you know, there's no doubt in their mind, although they don't know anything about the satellites, they do, however, always know they want to go on the G19.
And I guess for those people, it's relatively cost effective because they have the content, they have the programs, they may have to swap a few shows out because they don't have the rights for a particular market, but ostensibly they're just making a phone call, leasing the capacity, and are then able to actually get a pretty good revenue stream out of a particular market by joining that cluster of like-minded channels.
Absolutely, absolutely. We did see, you know, in the last few years a bit of a trend, however, while the satellite, you know, remains the most important ways for the distribution to their people in the North America, most of these channels these days, they would like to go for the hybrid solution. That means they need to be on the satellite, but beside that, they want to be on some kind of a streaming platform as well. So we see a big demand and a big rise in the demand for this hybrid solution.
Right, but by hybrid, they're running a regular satellite service and some sort of internet delivered catch-up service to go alongside that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Olivier, this is interesting, really, because it's one of particularly the language groups. It feels to be one of the few areas where the satellite operator, actually also the programmer, up to the platform operator, up to a certain extent, of being able to make sure that all these similar channels are available free to air for that particular language group or group of interest.
Yes, it's the case. So we have been discussing about the G19. So just to give you a concrete example to answer your question, Julian, remember we said there are 30 languages ish on G19, or people looking at G19 speaking 30 different languages. On One West, so the asset dedicated to the Central Eastern Europe, there are more than 15 different languages. On IS-20, there might be more than 20. So there are a lot of people watching who's benefiting from this free-to-air environment, watching those satellites. And obviously, diaspora is very important, ethnic is very important. So language is extremely important, but not only, genre as well. What kind of contents are you looking for? And it is one of the reasons why we have decided a couple of years ago to have a dedicated tool. The tool is named EPG, which stands for Electronic Program Guide. So the idea, I guess, is pretty simple, is to make sure that the consumer, the people who are watching G19 or on IS-20 in Africa and One West, Central Eastern Europe, or later on in the Pacific region on IS-19, the consumer are aware about what is available right now. So this is what we call the now and next. And most of the time it goes through a TV channels grid. So make sure what they are available, what's available, and right now, and obviously what's going to be available for the next 7 days, potentially 14 days. But what we do is basically, first of all, we make sure that they know how to receive correctly the TV channels. which might sound obvious, but sometimes it is not. So what kind of equipment do you need? Are you looking at what satellite dish are you looking at? What kind of gen of TV sets are you using, and so on? And then effectively, once they pick up the satellite platform, they are looking at what they are looking for in terms of languages. So the example of the Arabic speakers on G19 or the Farsi, for example, and then the genre. Then they will have effectively access. We will make sure that they have access to what is available. So this tool, the EPG, his brand is Video Now, and it is an extremely interesting user interface. Where it is pretty, the customer journey has to be an easy one. It has to be straightforward, and we just want to make sure people are aware of what's available, and that they do have access to it, And that's a very interesting experience because obviously
it is. Olivier, does the customer need the consumer watching at home, do they need a particular set-top box to get the EPG or collection maybe from a variety of different manufacturers? Or is this something which would be available on whatever box they happen to have?
So that's a very good question, Julian. What we are doing regarding this version of DPG, and we are just launching it right now for G19 first, and then later on we will make it available for the other satellites, as I said. But to answer your question, as long as they have our TV set with a DVB-S, so satellite tuner built in the TV, or they are using a set-top box with a DVB-S tuner built in, I would like to say this is enough. It doesn't need to have any kind of conditional access system built in. If it's a free-to-air set-top box, it will be okay. This is the reason why the TV set is straightforward, because you don't need to have any conditional access modules to plug in or whatsoever. Still, if they want to watch HD TV channels, we need to make sure, and they need to be aware that if they are not using a recent generation, what has been produced for the last 10 or 15 years by the set-top box manufacturer, if they are still using an old DVB-S MPEG-2 standard definition set-top box, they will see the TV channels, the HD one, but they will not enjoy it, obviously. So, but I would like to say 100% of the cases, people will see the TV channel. There is no limitation. They will, but if they want to watch in HD, yes, then you need to have a specific equipment.
I'd like to bring in my colleague Chris Juddle at this point. Don't forget to unmute, Chris. It's interesting what we've been hearing from Olivier and Mitchell over the last half hour or so, because the suggestion is actually that satellite is moving along quite nicely, and is actually making quite a bit of progression almost compared to some of the stories that are often heard. Yes, we all know that Amazon and Netflix and their regional equivalents are growing as well, but that doesn't mean to say that they can't necessarily live side by side with satellite.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, actually. And so taking the conversation back a little bit, I've got some more figures for you, actually. We were talking about HD channels, and the number of HD channels distributed via satellite is projected to grow by 75% between last year and 2029 to 24,000. Yeah. So that, in a way, for me, is a demonstration of the importance of satellite for the distribution of HD channels. And we've already spoken about Ultra HD as well. I think, as well, for me, so the satellite industry is showing itself to be very flexible, and sure, it's had a few setbacks recently, I'd say, but it is still growing.
And we do have that pressure on video revenues, don't we? If we look
absolutely,
at
absolutely, yeah.
Operators,
but other sides of the industry are growing. Sorry, other sides of the industry are growing, and the general projections, if you look ahead to a few years, is that the satellite industry as a whole will continue growing, and video will recover as well.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. And Mitya, just I don't know if you're one to go into predictions or anything, but what would your sort of prognosis be for the next 5 years? I feel going any further than that is often often dangerous. But what kind of direction do you think the satellite business will be going in, with specifically attention to those video revenues?
Yeah, I feel quite optimistic. You know, the trend, we don't see any slowing down. Sure, there is, you know, the COVID impacted some of the new investments. Some of the channels were put into some kind of a saving mode, temporary saving mode, or so on. But it didn't really influence the business as such. And if the big thing like COVID, which influenced like pretty much the whole world, didn't impact, then I think that for the next 5 years we can all, you know, sleep easy and be quite optimistic about it.
Olivier, I wouldn't expect you to say anything else than a healthy future for satellite. However, what do you see coming up on the horizon?
Yeah, I think, as Misha rightly said, the future is bright, which doesn't mean our life is an easy one, but the future is bright because this is an hybrid environment, an hybrid ecosystem, and as we said earlier, there is a fair amount of complexity around technology, but it doesn't really matter for the final viewer. Remember, I think that's the most important. We have some concrete examples where basically, so for us, media satellite, as I said, is the core business. Wherever it's a DTH, you know, pay TV or free-to-air, the one we just discussed. But what we have noticed is that, and this is an interesting potential evolution of our platform, is you might have hybrid offers or over-the-top proposal, OTT proposal, where basically the core business, the core mission of which are our mission, but of our customer as well, is to have DTH subs, because you know they're living in an area where basically, in order to have access to all the contents and having a robust distribution of the contents, satellite is really the main route, not to say the only one. But the OTT, so an additional layer, which is like a cherry on the cake for the DTH subscribers, where we'll have access to certain contents, which part of them might be available already through the satellite, but some of them not. But the core is again the subscription and people watching TV through satellite. But we will have access through dedicated market channel. We will have access to an OTT offer. So it is straightforward. It's transparent for them. There is no headache, you know, in launching the app. But it is, yes, it comes on top of. It's not instead of. It comes on top of the satellite proposal, which is extremely important. So we have a couple of good examples on one on IS-19, where basically one of our customers is providing 3 different pay TV bouquet, all in different languages, by the way, addressing specific audience, diaspora, and where he's proposing effectively to those consumer to have access to a dedicated OTT proposal, and it is included in what they're paying every month for the satellite. So that's an interesting example, and I think yes, the future is bright, because when you look at the millennials, the way they're consuming TV, which is extremely interesting, is as long as they live by their parents' place, they are watching contents through tablet or smartphone. As soon as they leave dad's and mom's home, they start to watch contents on the TV, on the main TV, because they enjoy the big TV sets, you know. So at the end of the day, you know, it's a constant evolving system, and I think there is space for all the technologies, obviously, including satellite.
Yeah, and certainly some of those big stadium shows, things like the Voice or Britain's Got Talent and its equivalents, certainly pulling in the big family audiences in front of the big screen. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us for this panel session, and do stay with us for the next session coming up shortly.
Thank you.
David, thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. Tell me a little bit more about Do and your role there.
Hello, Julian. Thanks for having me. So yeah, Do is one of the 2 telcos operating here in the UAE, and when it comes to Do Broadcast, is the B2B business that looks after satellite broadcasting mainly, and we are all about delivering TV channels over the satellites more demanded here in the region.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. David, I wonder if we could take this opportunity for you to tell us just a little bit more, maybe, about Do. So you're working as a business-to-business operation, and then obviously delivering channels and other services, I would think, to some of the other operators in the UAE.
Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, it's all about delivering content and help our customer monetizing it. So for that, we leverage the telco infrastructure. We have fiber deployed mostly all over the UAE. We have our teleports as part of our infrastructure. And in some cases, we also use partners. And in particular, obviously for the broadcasting, we work with most of the satellite system operating here in the MENA region.
So is that does the end consumer, are they aware of the Do brand at all, or does that stop at the operator who they're getting the service from? Yeah,
so Do has its own IPTV when it comes to video as the main consumer proposition. But yeah, mainly for the satellite part is not the best known division for the consumer part.
Mm. I guess it's like a lot of things these days. The consumer doesn't really need to know at all, do they? As long as they're enjoying the best service possible. How does it work in terms of channel delivery? In which case, are you relying, I guess, in very much a traditional way of pulling in the various satellite packages and channels which different content providers have on offer, and then distributing either to your own Do IPTV service or maybe onto a third party who then delivers them to the consumer?
So we have a very consultative approach to our customers. So very much we try to cater for wherever their needs are. When it comes to standard DTH solutions, we have DTH platforms that operates on the most demanded neighborhoods for our customers, that basically Arab channels. And we can offer a plethora of services. We can acquire channels over different ways. We can provide playout, and ultimately we can do the uplink and put them all together in the bouquet that we offer.
So you, with Intelsat, and I guess a few other operators as well,
yeah.
you sometimes like buying a transponder or half a transponder and then filling it up with as many channels from a particular genre as you can.
That's absolutely right. That's the way we are working with Intelsat at the moment. And we have very loyal customers that have been working for us for more than 7 years now on this bouquet, with no complaints whatsoever so far.
And David, what's easiest for you? Do you prefer to make a collection based on language, or do you do it perhaps on a particular genre based, for example? Is there I guess there's always a bit of mix and match and overlap between these.
We try to always has bouquet that makes sense from a genre perspective, but also from a geographical delivery perspective. Also, there are always channels that have a lot of traction and they attract other channels. So channels that want to be together with certain very popular channels in a certain area. So we try to accommodate as much as we can this request and to have solid and meaningful bouquet at the end of the day for the end viewer.
I guess it's the same as it's always been, really. You get one anchor channel, shall we call it, and that's it might be news, it might be sports, or it might be an entertainment channel. If that particular channel is at a certain satellite position or in a particular bouquet, that's where everybody else wants to be. Absolutely. Regardless of what their own genre is about.
Absolutely. This is exactly the same case here. So as I said, as much as we can, we try to accommodate this request, which is not always possible. But yeah, it's exactly that effect.
So David, what are the popular channels, as it were, right now in your part of the world? What are those ones which people
when it
absolutely want to see?
When it comes to free-to-air, definitely NBC is one of the most popular channels. But there are also other channels like CTV, which is also very popular among the customers in this area. Yeah.
I wonder, David, if you could maybe look forward a few years for us. I'm not quite sure as to how far we need to go, but how would you see, the market both in the UAE and the international satellite market developing? What changes do you think you could reasonably anticipate?
It's a very interesting question. I think that we are in the middle of this transition that never seems to finally consolidate into something. This is my perception. So we have the disruption of the OTT and the constant debate whether this is going to replace or not the satellite. I think that the satellite is going to remain. I think it's the mainstream for the linear delivery, but it has to be bundled with other options that definitely the viewership is demanding. And this is what we are trying to do. We are trying to bundle services. We are trying to offer our customers not only the traditional satellite delivery, but to give them with the option of adding other solutions more related to on-demand viewership, just to complement the services that they offer to the end viewers.
I guess this is the thing, everywhere, and it seems to be a lot about the brand, doesn't it? If you're the most popular channel, then there's a reasonable expectation you might actually also have the most popular catch-up service as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we understand that it's not an easy choice for our customers to decide where to spend their budget. And there are many constraints that they face in many cases, like what is the business case associated to it? How can I monetize these services? Am I ready to operate these new services? Our approach to this is, again, trying to consult, to help with the experience we have, but also to provide a managed solution that allows them to try without the need of doing their own investment and without the need of having their own skill set in-house that we know it's at the end of the day is expensive. So this allows them to try this service, and let's say that we can give them the approach of fail cheap in case that's not the model that you ultimately needs to go for.
The channels that have so many dilemmas. I know, only a few years ago, the leading commercial channels in Europe were saying, well, why do we want to go HD? We can't charge any more for the adverts just because they're in HD. But at the other end of it, you have the customer who's expecting that. And now I almost feel we're going through exactly the same with 4K.
It is absolutely like this. You have to have a very good understanding of the market that you are going into in order to actually ensure that money has a proper return, right? And the example of the HD is there, or the 4K more recently, as a constant debate of, even in the region, are the customer, the end viewership, ready to actually receive these channels? And taking aside your point about, and even if I spend this extra money for the higher quality, can I monetize it better? At the end of the day, it's also a matter of, if this really becomes the trend and the norm, there is no other way. So, and technology is also getting cheaper as we go along, right? So I think there is this balance that has to be found along the way.
It's funny, I was chatting to somebody the other day, they had another satellite operator, and they were saying that in their, above their branch office, they have a TV retailer selling television sets. And all of these sets are being advertised on, being the latest 4K devices. Of course, there's absolutely no 4K channels available in that region whatsoever. Yeah, out the consumers go to provide the set.
But I think the industry needs to be always looking for the latest advances and technology. Otherwise, we will lag behind. So I think it is important that from the different entities that are part of the industry, we make sure that we push for the latest innovation to make sure that we can offer to the customers and that we keep the industry fully alive.
David, thank you very much. So Samuel, where would you say the action is right now? Is it Middle East, Europe, Africa, United States, or maybe somewhere else as to where there's the most business to be had?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think action is pretty much everywhere. It's like satellite. So there's loads of things, different things, I would say, on different markets. But there's a lot going on. So I think we've got some actions. I don't know if action is always the right word, but we're dealing quite a lot with the impacts of the 5G and the C-band impact. So there's a lot of solutions to be found. So lots of work is taking place.
This is the changing of frequencies, I think, particularly in the United States market. The FCC has basically told operators, you've got to do this, and they're doing their best to comply right now.
It is in the US, but it's also in Asia. So yes, that's really interesting development. There's probably some solutions to be found on satellite, but sometimes also on other technical solutions like IP delivery. It's always a solution to be found based on our takers. Where you address free-to-air markets or pay TV markets. Interesting development on that point. Certainly, lots of questions to be answered. So that's taking place of actions. That's we also, I would say, still on the trend that started quite some years ago, where there's a bigger focus on quality rather than quantity. I'm talking about number of channels. So there are some strong pay TV platforms, and we, believe it or not, we're still working on upgrading channels from SD to HD. So that's taking some of the actions. So that's interesting. Even though there is the pandemic, I mean, the channels are still have their eyes focused on reaching their audience, with better quality and good content. So that is also.
Yeah, it's curious, isn't it? Because channels are adding HD services or maybe closing SD services in favor of HD these days. But at the same time, those same channels may have video on demand services that they're launching in parallel. And it almost seems to be a case that the broadcasters have to be on every platform. And that doesn't just mean every satellite in a particular region. That might also mean SD, HD, then on demand, which they're delivering perhaps by internet. They might have a mobile service as well. And there just seems to be no end, if you like, to the expense that the operator has, or the channel operator, that is, needs to make.
Yes, there are lots of broadcasters out there. They all have their own strategy to, delivering into their audience. And I guess that's how strong they are in addressing the market themselves. They've got this capacity on some markets, on all markets, but sometimes they will go with, pay TV operators. But different strategies there, which is, making big differences. I would say where it's a lot more difficult is the free-to-air market, and there is definitely a big challenge to the distribution of a satellite business models, so to speak.
Do you think it's as much these days, Samuel, about value rather than the cost for channels, and the kind of things, services, say, that Globecast can provide to somebody, the ability to send a channel up to an Intelsat satellite somewhere, but at the same time being able to reversion that content so the operator can send it off to a mobile service as well?
So it is true that once you have the content, and especially when you offer media management solutions, like Playout, when you have the content, you can offer a large panel of different solutions. And it's what you're talking about here is is effectively distributing on several platforms. So again, we're going back to what's the strategy for the channel, and I would say especially when they have an international distribution strategy, and then you would provide probably the best solution for the market they want to address.
And that's the problem, isn't it? If you're addressing multiple markets, it might be slightly different, even in neighbouring countries sometimes, as to what is required to reach your audience. In one market, it might be satellite, free to air, no question. Next door, you might have to go on the satellite to reach the cable operator who takes it to the consumer.
There's so many varieties there. Yes, like you're talking about these ones, but there's also some countries where some contents might not be allowed, so you might have to hide the cigarette or whatever. It's it is really important to be able to offer all these solutions that I would complement. It's not only about the distribution only, it's all the services that goes around, and also the advice. You need to support the broadcasters in their development strategy, because they can't be experts in all areas. So it's definitely, you're talking about, for example, exporting into the content into the US or Northern America. There's some positions like Galaxy 19 that we operate with Intelsat, and they are markets where we export from the Middle East, from Eastern Europe, from Asia, and the broadcasters they want to be in the American market because that's almost a must-have. But they don't know how to get there and how to especially operate in for example, a free-to-air environment or dealing with cable operators. So there's a lot of work there being done to support the broadcasters, and that's quite important to have a partner like Intelsat to just to make sure that we are creating the best values for these broadcasters in targeting the North American market.
Mm. I'm wondering if the next phase. I'll start this again if you don't mind. I'm wondering if the next phase of digital might actually be using it to do even more better targeting, although that might be internet based. Equally, it could be on the satellite, making it more country or language specific. It seems to me that even now there seems to be new opportunities to tap in, be that using say G19 to get across to the United States and packaging language specific channels that way, or by some other route. I don't know if that's something that you might agree with.
I mean, there's definitely some value in having a good neighborhood, several channels in the same genre, same language. That creates value for the platform and value for the broadcasters, because that becomes the position to look at for the audience, because they will find their content. They might find similar content or the same content on with a cable operator, but they might have to dip in several different platforms to get all their choice. So it's a bit like when you want to get married. If you got a shop with lots of jewelry shops in the street, the same street, then this is where you can get the best offer. So I think that's a position like that offers these opportunities to the audience and to the broadcasters.
Looking forward a bit, what do you think if we were to go, and it's always tricky with these things, 3-5 years in the future as to the state of the satellite market? We know there is the question mark perhaps over video revenues, but actually when it comes down to it, right now they seem to be holding up, and there's so much more opportunity for satellite with as you mentioned earlier, high definition services, and obviously Ultra HD services, albeit at the moment really only at the premium end.
And 3 to 5 years is probably a a good time to look at. There's definitely some markets that will still be performing over satellite. I mean, we've seen in different areas long-term commitments made over satellite. We're reading about 10-year deals from a lot of pay TV platforms or in the DTT market. So the cost of satellite is amazingly cheap when you look at the per households or per affiliates, whatever the formula is. It's a good, really robust and cheap way of delivering to the audience. So satellite as a mean, even if it's under the threat of some some IP delivery solutions, I think it's still a good card to play. But what will make the difference between a success and a so-so is how much value we can add to that. You're talking about the standards. Is it SD? Is it HD or UHD? I'm yet to sign a UHD contract, at least on satellite. But this is things that we're seeing on the playout front, for example. So the content is getting produced, prepared. So hopefully, HD will soon be the very norm, and UHD, probably we see more and more on the occasional use stuff as in that side of the business, definitely. So yeah, and then it's about I would say playing with the availability of the capacity, in that context for the 5G and the interferences on C-band, for example. So there's what's ahead of us is probably a lot of priority management. Where to put which content and what solution for what content. There's probably going to be a lot of these aspects to manage.
And Samuel, tell us a little bit about Globecast, company being well established, but right now, where's the company focusing in particular?
Yes, so at the moment at Globecast, there is a lot of thinking around what happened with the pandemic. Probably a lot of people know us as a more in the satellite world, satellite company, so to speak. But it's something we really moved on, and all the thinking about the remote, for example, that's a word that is becoming normal in the current situation. So there is a lot of thinking around what we can do remotely, how we can distribute, safely the content. We're thinking about obviously the usual IP or cloud delivery way of delivering going around in circle, delivering the content. So there is a strong reflection on these aspects. There's a lot of support brought to broadcasters for delivering into their key areas. So over satellite, on pay TV and free to air. So there's strong support to these broadcasters in their approach about where they want to launch and in which format. So lots of aspects around migrating to HD. I think we're getting towards the end of the bubble, or where we had the SD and HD. But we see also a few new broadcasters who want to launch in new areas, and they're going with a HD format straight away. So there is some support. Decisions are slow because investments are not being done quickly. The broadcasters are really looking at value for money. And so this is where we're helping. Media management is another area where we are investing a lot. We've moved onto cloud and virtual solutions. So that's the factory, so to speak, has been upgraded for a lot more flexibility. It takes 4 months, probably 5 years ago, to launch a channel, and we've been able to launch some channels over the weekend. So you're getting incredible flexibility now with virtualization and cloud technology. So there's some really interesting areas of development for us, and it's all about creating value for the broadcasters.
Well, thanks to everyone for taking part in our panel session today. Samuel Lemercier, Managing Director in the UK of Globecast. Also, our thanks go to Mitya Ludsin, who is General Manager of STN. My colleague, Chris Juddle from Broadband TV News. And of course, Olivier Herson, Intelsat's Managing Sales Director. Thank you all very much for joining us.
Thank you to Broadband TV News and all our speakers for this great panel session, which was very interactive and undoubtedly stimulated interesting reflections within our audience. We'll now have a 5-minute break before moving on to the second part of this event, which will be focused on the Africa region.